It was a dark and stormy night when Alice, a young nurse, arrived at the small village hospital. The wind was howling, and the rain was hitting the windows, creating an ominous atmosphere. She was on night duty, and although she was used to working on the darkest nights, this night promised to be different. The hospital seemed a gloomy place even during the day, with its old architecture and long, empty hallways. But at night, it took on an even deeper aura of mystery. Alice knew there were stories about the place, stories that locals whispered when they thought no one was listening. While making her rounds at the hospital, Alice began to hear strange whispers. At first, she tried to ignore them, chalking them up to her imagination. But the whispers persisted, whispers that seemed to emerge from the shadows of the walls and the dark corners of the corridors. She approached an empty ward and stopped to listen carefully. The whispers turned into unintelligible murmurs, but a feeling of uneasiness came over her. Alice shook her head, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. She continued her rounds, but the feeling that she was being watched accompanied her. It was as if invisible eyes were following her, eyes that peered at her from the shadows. She quickened her pace, seeking out the wards with real patients to care for, hoping the unsettling presence would leave her. It was when he entered a dark room that the terrifying experience began. At the bedside of a sleeping patient, Alice saw a shadowy figure. She blinked her eyes, thinking her mind was playing tricks on her, but the figure remained there, oblivious to the dim light emanating from the hallway. The shadow had a humanoid shape, but its outlines were blurred, as if it were made of smoke. What disturbed her most were the figure's eyes. They were empty, without irises or pupils, just two black orbs that stared at her. A sinister smile appeared on his dark face, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. Alice took a step back, her heart racing. She wanted to scream, but her body felt paralyzed with fear. The figure stared at her with lifeless eyes and extended a dark hand towards her. It was at that moment that the nurse found the strength to react. She turned and ran down the hallway, screaming for help. The whispers that were once just murmurs turned into cruel laughter, following her as she fled. Other hospital staff responded to Alice's call, but by the time they reached the room, the shadowy figure had disappeared. They tried to calm her down, but the young nurse was visibly shaken. As the night wore on, the hospital remained enveloped in an eerie silence, and the whispers persisted, as if the shadows reveled in the fear they had provoked. Alice was convinced that it was all just her imagination. However, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something terrible lurked in the shadows of those ancient walls. She knew she had to solve the mystery of the hospital and the spirits that haunted it before it was too late. In the days following the frightening hospital experience, Alice couldn't get the vision of the shadowy figure out of her head. She knew something was wrong, and her curiosity pushed her to investigate the hospital's mysterious past. Alice began researching the hospital's archives and talking to some of the institution's senior doctors. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. The hospital had a dark history dating back many decades. There were reports of lurid medical experiments carried out at the facilities, cruel treatments inflicted on patients, and, in some cases, unexplained disappearances. Many patients had died at the hands of doctors who seemed to lack compassion. Talking to Dr. Harlan, one of the hospital's oldest doctors, Alice heard a story that chilled her to the bone. He told of a doctor named Dr. Mortimer, who used to conduct secret experiments on sick patients, claiming he was seeking cures for incurable diseases. However, Mortimer's methods were cruel and inhumane, and many patients did not survive his cures. When Alice questioned what happened to Dr. Mortimer, Harlan looked darkly at her. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some say he was taken by the shadows that haunt this place. Fear began to settle in Alice's heart. She realized that the whispers and shadows she had witnessed could be related to the hospital's sinister past. She felt the need to do something to help the tormented souls. As she delved deeper into the investigation, Alice also discovered reports about the silver locket that Dr. Mortimer used to wear. According to the stories, the locket was a mysterious object that he claimed had supernatural powers. It was speculated that the locket was linked to Mortimer's dark activities and could hold the key to what was happening at the hospital. Whispers and shadows continued to plague the hospital, making the nights increasingly frightening. Alice was convinced that there was a connection between the locket and the dark entities that haunted her. Determined to unravel the mystery and help tormented souls find peace, she committed herself to finding the locket and learning more about its power. Alice felt her mission was clear: free the hospital from the shadows of the past, freeing the tormented souls crying out for justice. However, the challenge that presented itself was terrifying, and she knew that she would have to face the supernatural forces that haunted the place. With determination and courage, she embarked on a journey to uncover the hospital's dark secrets and, hopefully, find a way to free the souls that were trapped in its darkness. As Alice delved deeper into her investigation into the hospital and the mysterious silver locket, the supernatural events intensified. The night after her conversation with Dr. Harland, she felt the shadows come to life around her. They moved through the hallways, gliding through the darkness like sentient entities. The whispers that were once just murmurs became clearer and more aggressive. They whispered in a strange language, full of anguish and anger. It was as if the tormented souls roaming the hospital were growing impatient, demanding justice. One night, while making her nightly rounds, Alice witnessed something that made her question her own sanity. She entered one of the dark rooms, and the shadows began to twist and coalesce, forming a grotesque figure. It was the silhouette of Dr. Mortimer, the doctor responsible for the atrocities of the past. The shadowy figure materialized before her, its presence suffocating. His empty eyes shone with a sinister gleam, and his evil smile widened. He reached a skeletal hand towards Alice, as if he was about to touch her face. Alice's heart raced, and a wave of panic washed over her. She knew she couldn't allow the evil spirit to touch her. With a scream of terror, she backed away and ran towards the corridor, asking her colleagues for help. When other hospital staff arrived at the room, Dr. Mortimer's figure had disappeared. They looked at Alice with concern, but she was determined to continue her quest to understand and confront the supernatural forces that haunted her. Alice spent days researching exorcism rituals and methods for dealing with evil spirits. She knew she needed to find a way to face the shadows that tormented her and free the souls that were trapped in the hospital. As the nights passed, the shadows continued to manifest themselves with increasing aggression. They surrounded Alice, whispering threats and ominous promises. But she didn't back down. She was determined to end the cycle of suffering that had plagued the hospital for so long. Finally, Alice found an old book that contained information about an exorcism ritual. She knew it was her only hope of facing the shadows and putting an end to the nightmare. With the help of a local priest, she began preparing the ritual, gathering the necessary items and studying each step carefully. The night of the ritual arrived. Alice was nervous, but her determination drove her forward. She entered the hospital with the priest, carrying a lit candle and the silver locket she believed was linked to the shadows. As the ritual continued, the shadows began to stir. They writhed and howled, resisting the light and power of the ritual. The entire hospital seemed to vibrate with a dark energy. Alice and the priest didn't give up. They recited the words of the ritual with fervor, calling for the release of tormented souls. As the ceremony reached its climax, the shadows began to disperse, like smoke carried by the wind. The darkness receded, and the hospital fell silent. The exorcism ritual had worked. The shadows had been driven away, and the souls who had suffered so much were finally free. Relief filled Alice's heart, but she knew that the hospital still carried the memories of a dark past. Alice had faced the horror and supernatural forces that haunted the hospital. She became the keeper of the light, determined to keep the shadows at bay and ensure that the hospital's sinister past did not return to haunt it. Night had given way to dawn, and with it, new hope of healing and redemption for the village hospital. With the shadows finally driven away and the tormented souls freed, Alice hoped the hospital could find peace and healing. She continued to work there, fulfilling her role as a nurse and keeper of the light, keeping the shadows at bay. However, she knew that the battle was not yet completely won. The hospital underwent a gradual transformation. The gloomy atmosphere that surrounded him began to lighten, and the unsettling murmurs that once filled the halls disappeared. Patients began to feel more comfortable and confident in the care they were receiving. It seemed like the hospital was healing as the shadows receded. Alice also continued her investigation into the silver locket that she believed was linked to Dr. Mortimer's evil activities. She wanted to discover the truth behind the medallion's origin and the power it contained. In her research, Alice found records about an ancient occult cult that used to meet in the region where the hospital was located. They believed that the medallion was a mystical artifact capable of granting its bearer supernatural powers, but that it was also linked to dark forces. The cult worshipped dark entities and performed sinister rituals to summon them. With the help of local historians, Alice tracked the locket's whereabouts and discovered that it had been hidden in an abandoned crypt near the hospital. The medallion was kept in a small silver safe, protected by a series of magical symbols. Alice was determined to find the locket and ensure it was sealed permanently so it could never fall into the wrong hands again. She shared her findings with the local priest, who agreed to help her perform the sealing ritual. The night they went to the crypt, Alice and the priest carried with them a lit lantern and an ancient book of incantations that contained the words necessary for the sealing. They were prepared to face any obstacle that came their way. Upon reaching the crypt, they found the small silver safe decorated with strange symbols. The medallion was inside, emanating a dark and mysterious aura. Carefully, they began to recite the words of the sealing ritual, while the medallion glowed with an unearthly light. Shadows began to stir around them, as if the entities serving the medallion were trying to prevent it from being sealed. But Alice and the priest remained steadfast, reciting the words of the incantation with determination. As the ritual unfolded, the medallion was enveloped in a barrier of brilliant light. It trembled and trembled, as if it was struggling to free itself, but finally, with a bang and a flash of light, the medallion was sealed. Relief filled Alice's heart. She knew she had accomplished her mission to stop the locket from falling into the wrong hands and causing more suffering. With the mystical artifact sealed, the shadows that once surrounded him completely disappeared. The hospital, now free from the shadows of the past and the locket's evil power, has undergone a remarkable transformation. It became a place of healing, where patients could receive the care they needed without fear. Alice continued to work at the hospital, but her experience changed her. She became a keeper of the light, committed to protecting the hospital and ensuring that darkness never overtook it again. Over time, the hospital became a symbol of redemption and healing, a horror story that turned into a story of overcoming. The shadows that once terrorized the place have been banished, and the souls that suffered have finally found peace. Alice knew that evil could be defeated by courage and determination. She became an example of how love and compassion could triumph over the darkest forces. She continued her life as a keeper of the light, dedicated to facing the shadows and protecting the vulnerable. His story has become a local legend, reminding everyone that hope and redemption can emerge from even the darkest of places.